Thank you, and good morning. That's Charlie. I'm Warren. You can tell us apart because he can hear and I can see. That's why we work together so well. We usually have our specialty. I'd like to welcome you to, we got a lot of out-of-towners here, and I'd like to welcome you to Omaha. It's a terrific... It's a terrific city, and Charlie's lived in California now for about 70 years, but he's still got a lot of Omaha in him. Both of us were born within 2 miles of this building that you're in. And Charlie, as he mentioned in his description of his amorous triumphs in high school, Charlie graduated from Central High, which is about 1 mile from here. It's a public school. And my dad, my first wife, my 3 children, and 2 of my grandchildren have all graduated from the same school. In fact, my grandchildren say they've had the same teachers that my dad. It's a great city. I hope you get to see a lot of it while you're here. And in just a minute, we will start a question period, hopefully a question and answer period, that will last till about noon, and then we'll take a break for an hour or so. We'll reconvene at 1, and then we'll continue with the question and answer period till 3:30, and then we'll break for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll convene the annual meeting of Berkshire, which we have 3 propositions that people wish to speak on, so that could last perhaps as long as an hour. Before we start, I'd like to make a couple of introductions. The first being Carrie Silva, who's been with us about 7 years, and can we have a light on Carrie? I think Carrie, are you there? Carrie, stand up, Carrie, come on. Carrie puts on this whole program. She came with us about 7 years ago, and a few years ago I said, why don't you just put on the annual meeting for me? And she handles it all, and she has 2 young children, and she has dozens and dozens and dozens of exhibitors that she works with, and as you can imagine, with all of what we put on and all of the numbers of you that come, the hotels and the airlines and the rental cars and everything, she does it as if she could do that and be juggling 3 balls at the same time. She's amazing, and I want to thank her for putting on this program for us. I also would like to welcome and have you welcome our directors. They will be voted on later. So I'll do this alphabetically. They're here in the front row, and if we could just have the spotlight drop on them as they're introduced. And alphabetically, there's Howard Buffett, Steve Burke, Sue Decker, Bill Gates, Sandy Gottesman, Charlotte Guyman. We have Charlie Munger next to me. Tom Murphy, Ron Olson, Scott, and Meryl Whitmer. Yeah. One more introduction I'm going to make, but I'll save that for just a minute. And our earnings report was put out yesterday. As we regularly explain, the realized investment gains or losses in any period really mean nothing. I mean, we could take a lot of gains if we wanted to. We could take a lot of losses we want to do, but we don't really think about the timing of what we do at all, except in relation to the intrinsic value of what we're buying or selling. We do not make earnings forecasts, and we have, on March 31st, we have over $90 billion of net unrealized gains. So if we wanted to report almost any number you can think of and count capital gains as part of the earnings, we could do it. And so in the first quarter, and I would say that we have a very, very, very slight preference this year, if everything else were equal. Well, it's true in any year, but it's a little more so this year. We would rather take losses than gains because of the tax effect if two securities were equally valued. And there's probably just one touch more of emphasis on that this year because we are taxed on gains at 35%, which means we also get the tax benefit at 35% of any losses we take. And I would say that there's some chance of that rate being lower, meaning that losses would have less tax value to us after this year than they would have after this year than this year. That is not a big deal, but it would be a very slight preference, and it may get to be more of a factor in deferring any gains and perhaps accelerating any losses as the year gets closer to December 31st, assuming, and I'm making no predictions about it, but assuming that there were to be a tax act that had the effect of reducing the earnings. So in the first quarter, insurance underwriting was the swing factor, and then there's a lot more about this in our 10Q, which you can look up on the internet. And you really, if you're seriously interested in evaluating our earnings or our businesses, you should go to the 10Q because the summary report, as we point out every quarter, does not really get to a number of the main points of valuation. I would just mention two factors in connection with the insurance situation, which I love. In the first 4 months, not the first 3 months, but the first 4 months, GEICO's had a net gain of 700,000 policyholders, and that's the highest number I can remember. There may have been a figure larger than that somewhere in the past. I did not go back and look at them all. But last year, I believe that figure was like 300,000. And this has been a wonderful period for us at GEICO because several of our major competitors have decided, and they publicly stated this. In fact, one of them just reiterated it the other day, although they now changed their policy. But they intentionally cut back on new business because new business carries with it a significant loss in the first year. There's just costs of acquiring new business. Plus the loss ratio, strangely enough, on first-year business tends to run almost 10 points higher than on renewal business. And so not only do you have acquisition costs, but you actually have a higher loss ratio. So when you write a lot of new business, you're going to lose money on that portion of the business that year. And we wrote a lot of new business, and at least two of our competitors announced that they were lightening up for a while on new business because they did not want to pay the penalty of the first-year loss. And, of course, that's made to order for us, so we just put our foot to the floor and try to write as much business, good business, as we can, and there are costs to that. A second factor, well, it's not a factor in the P&L, but an important event in the first quarter is that we increased our float. And on the slide, I believe it shows it year over year, $16 billion. $14 billion of that came in the first quarter of this year. So we had a $14 billion increase in float. And for some years, I've been telling you it's going to be hard to increase the float at all. And I still will say the same thing. But it's nice to have $14 billion or more, which is one reason. If you look at our 10Q, you will see that our cash and cash equivalents, including Treasury bills, now has come to well over $90 billion. So I think I feel very good about the first quarter, even though our operating earnings were down a little. But one quarter means nothing. I mean, over time, what really counts is whether we're building the value of the businesses that we own. And I'm always interested in the current figures, but I'm always dreaming about the future figures. There's one more person I would like to introduce to you today, and I'm quite sure he's here. I haven't seen him, but I understood he was coming. There's I believe that he's made it today, and that is Jack Bogle, who I talked about in the annual report. Jack Bogle has probably done more for the American investor than any man in the country. Jack, could you stand up? There he is. Jack Bogle, many years ago, he wasn't the only one that was talking about an index fund, but it wouldn't have happened without him. I mean, Paul Samuelson talked about it. Ben Graham even talked about it. But the truth is, it was not in the interest of the investment industry of Wall Street. It was not in their interest, actually, to have the development of an index fund, the index fund, because it brought down fees dramatically. And as we've talked about some in the reports and other people have commented, index funds overall have delivered for shareholders a result that has been better than Wall Street professionals as a whole. And part of the reason for that is that they brought down the costs very significantly. So when Jack started, very few people, certainly Wall Street, did not applaud him. And he was the subject of some derision and a lot of attacks. And now we're talking trillions when we get into index funds. And we're talking a few basis points when we talk about investment fees in the case of index funds, but still hundreds of basis points when we talk about fees elsewhere. And I estimate that Jack, at a minimum, has left in the pockets of investors without hurting them overall in terms of performance at all, gross performance. He's put tens and tens and tens of billions into their pockets, and those numbers are going to be hundreds and hundreds of billions over time. So it's Jack's 88th birthday on Monday. So I just say happy birthday, Jack, and thank you on behalf of American investors. And Jack, I've got great news for you. You're going to be 88 on Monday, and in only 2 years, you'll be eligible for an executive position at Berkshire. So hang in there, buddy. Okay, we've got a panel of expert journalists on this side and expert analysts on that side and expert shareholders in the middle, and we're going to rotate, starting with the analysts, and somewhere here I have here we go. And we'll do this through the afternoon. If we get through 54 questions, which would be 6 for each journalist, 6 for each analyst, and 18 more for the audience, then we will go strictly to the audience. I don't think I've got any information as to what the situation is on overflow rooms, but we'll go to at least one of them. But let's start off with Carol Loomis of Fortune magazine, the longest serving employee in the history of Time Inc., I believe, with 60 years. And Carol, go to it.
Thank you. Thanks from all of us journalists up here. I know that there are many, many people out there who have sent us questions that aren't going to get answered. And I just want to say that it's very hard to get a question answered. The one thing I could suggest is you follow Warren's thought in the annual report that he wants everybody to go away from this meeting more educated about Berkshire than they were when they came. And one way you can do that is keep your questions quite directly Berkshire related or relating to the annual letter. Even then, it will be hard to get your question answered. The three of us only have 18 questions in total. But I encourage you to think in the Berkshire-related direction when you're submitting a question next year. Now, my first question. It's about Wells Fargo, which is Berkshire's largest equity holding, $28 billion at the end of the year. And this question comes from a shareholder who did not wish to be identified. In the wake of the sales practices scandal that last year engulfed Wells Fargo, the company's independent directors commissioned an investigation and hired a large law firm to assist in carrying it out. The findings of the investigation, which were harsh, have been released in what is called the Wells Fargo Sales Practices Report. You can find it on the internet. It concludes that a major part of the company's problem was that, and I quote, Wells Fargo's decentralized corporate structure gave too much autonomy to the community bank's senior leadership, end of quote. Mr. Buffett, how do you satisfy yourself that Berkshire isn't subject to the same risk with its highly decentralized structure and the very substantial autonomy given to senior leadership of the operating companies?
Yeah, it's true that we at Berkshire probably we certainly operate on a more decentralized plan than any company of remotely our size. And we count very heavily on principles of behavior rather than loads of rules. It's one reason at every annual meeting you see that Solomon description, and it's why I write very few communiques to our managers, but I send them one once every 2 years, and it basically says that we've got all the money we need. We'd like to have more, but it's not a necessity. But we don't have 1 ounce of reputation more than we need, and that our reputation at Berkshire is in their hands. And Charlie and I believe that if you establish the right sort of culture, and that culture to some extent self-selects who you obtain as directors and as managers, that you will get better results that way in terms of behavior than if you have a 1,000-page guidebook. You're going to have problems regardless. We have 367,000, I believe, employees. Now, if you have a town with 367,000 households, which is about what the Omaha metropolitan area is, people are doing something wrong as we talk here today. There's no question about it. And the real question is whether the managers are worrying and thinking about finding and correcting any bad behavior, and whether if they fail in that, whether the message gets to Omaha and whether we do something about it. At Wells Fargo, there were 3 very significant mistakes, but there was one that dwarfs all of the others. You're going to have incentive systems at any business, almost any business. There's nothing wrong with incentive systems, but you've got to be very careful what you incentivize. And you can incentivize bad behavior, and if so, you better have a system for recognizing it. Clearly, at Wells Fargo, there was an incentive system built around the idea of cross-selling and number of services per customer, and the company in every quarterly investor presentation highlighted how many services per customer. So it was the focus of the organization, a major focus, and undoubtedly people got paid and graded and promoted based on that number, or at least partly based on that number. Well, it turned out that was incentivizing the wrong kind of behavior. we've made similar mistakes. I mean, any company's going to make some mistakes in designing a system, but it's a mistake, and you're going to find out about it at some point. And I'll get to how we find out about it. But the biggest mistake was that, and I don't know, obviously I don't know the facts as to how the information got passed up the line at Wells Fargo. But at some point, if there's a major problem, the CEO will get wind of it. And that is, at that moment, that's the key to everything, because the CEO has to act. That Solomon situation that you saw happened because on April, I think, 28th, the CEO of Solomon, the president of Solomon, the general counsel of Solomon, sat in a room, and they had described to them by a fellow named John Merriweather some bad practice, terrible practice that was being conducted by a fellow named Paul Moser who worked for him. And Paul Moser was flim-flamming the United States Treasury, which is a very dumb thing to do. And he was doing it partly out of spite, because he didn't like the Treasury and they didn't like him. So he put in phony bids for U.S. Treasuries and all of that. So on April 28th, roughly, the CEO and all these people knew that they had something that had gone very wrong, and they had to report it to the Federal Reserve Board in New York, or Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And the CEO, John Goodfriend, said he would do it, and then he didn't do it. And he undoubtedly put it off just because it was an unpleasant thing to do. And then on May 15th, another Treasury auction was held, and Paul Moser put in a bunch of phony bids again. And at this point, it's all over, because the top management had known ahead of time, and now a guy that was a pyromaniac had gone out and lit another fire, and he lit it after they'd been warned that he was a pyromaniac, essentially. And it all went downhill from there. It had to stop when the CEO learns about it. And then they made a third mistake, actually, but again, it pales in comparison to the second mistake. They made a third mistake when they totally underestimated the impact of what they had done once it became uncovered, because there was a penalty of $185 million, and in the banking business, people get fined billions and billions of dollars for mortgage practices and all kinds of things. The total fines against the big banks, I don't know whether it totals 30 or 40 or billion or whatever the number may be. So they measured the seriousness of the problem by the dimensions of the fine, and they thought a $185 million fine signaled a less offensive practice than something involved $2 billion, and they were totally wrong on that. But the main problem was they didn't act when they learned about it. It was bad enough having a bad system, but they didn't act. At Berkshire, we have the main source of information for me about anything that's being done wrong at a subsidiary is the hotline. Now, we get 4,000 or so hotline reports, or that come, we get communications on the hotline, perhaps 4,000 times a year, and most of them are frivolous. You know, the guy next to me has bad breath or something like that. I mean, but there are a few serious ones, and the head of our internal audit, Becky Amick, looks at all those people. A lot of them come in anonymous, probably most of them. And some of them she refers back to the companies, probably most of them. But anything that looks serious, you know, I will hear about. And that has led to action. We'll put it more than once. And we spent real money investigating some of those. We put special investigators sometimes on them. And like I say, it is uncovered certain practices that we would not at all condone at the parent company. I think it's a good system. I don't think it's perfect. I don't know what. I'm sure they've got an internal audit at Wells Fargo, and I'm sure they've got a hotline. And I don't know the facts, but I would just have to bet that a lot of communications came in on that, and I don't know what their system was for for getting them to the right person, and I don't know who did what at any given time. But it was a huge, huge, huge error if they were getting, and I'm sure they were, getting some communications and they ignored them, or they just sent them back down to somebody down below. Charlie, you followed it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, put me down as skeptical when some law firm thinks they know how to fix something like this. If you're in a business where you have a whole lot of people under incentives very likely to cause a lot of misbehavior, of course you need a big compliance department. Every big wirehouse stock brokerage firm has a huge compliance department, and if we had one, we would have a big compliance department too, wouldn't we, Warren?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that everybody should try and solve their problems with more and more compliance. I think we've had less trouble over the years by being more careful in whom we pick to have power and having a culture of trust. I think we have less trouble, not more.
But we will have trouble from time to time.
Yes, of course. Yeah. We'll be blindsided someday.
Charlie says an ounce of prevention. He said when Ben Franklin, who he worships, said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, he understated it. That an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And I would say a pound of cure promptly applied is worth a ton of cure that's delayed. And problems don't go away. John Goodfriend said that problem originally was, he called it a traffic ticket. He told the troops there at Solomon it was a traffic ticket, and it almost brought down a business. Some other CEO that day described the problem that he had encountered as a footfall, and it resulted in incredible damage to the institution and so on. You've got to act promptly, and frankly, I don't know any better system than hotlines and anonymous letters. To me, I get anonymous letters, and I've gotten 3 or 4 of them, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, that have resulted in major changes. And very, very occasionally they're signed. Usually, almost always they're anonymous, but it wouldn't make any difference because there will be no retribution against anybody, obviously, if they call our attention to something that's going wrong. But I will tell you, as we sit here, somebody is doing, quite a few people are probably doing something wrong at Berkshire, and usually it's very limited. I mean, it may be stealing small amounts of money or something like that. But when it gets to some sales practice like was taking place at Wells Fargo, you can see the kind of damage it would do. We will now shift over to the analysts and Johnny Brent.
Hi, Warren. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for having me. You've addressed the risk of driverless cars to Geico's business, but it strikes me that driverless trucks could narrow the cost advantage of railroads even if the number of crew members in a locomotive eventually declines from 2 to 0. Is autonomous technology more of an opportunity or more of a threat for the Burlington Northern?
Oh, I would say that driverless trucks are a lot more of a threat than an opportunity to the Burlington Northern. And I would say that if driverless cars became pervasive, it would only be because they were safer, and that would mean that the overall economic cost of auto-related losses had gone down, and that would drive down the premium income of Geico. So I would say both of those, and autonomous vehicles, widespread, would hurt us if they spread to trucks, and they would hurt our auto insurance business. I think my personal view is that they will certainly come. I think they may be a long way off, but that will depend. It'll probably, frankly, depend on experience in the first early months of the introduction than test situations. And if they make the world safer, it's going to be a very good thing, but it won't be a good thing for auto insurers. And similarly, if they learn how to move trucks more safely, there's a tends to be driver shortages in the truck business now, it obviously improves their position vis-a-vis the railroads. Charlie?
Well, I think that's perfectly clear.
Yeah. Finally, approval all these years. Okay. Station 1, the shareholder.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. My name is Brian Martin, and I'm from Springfield, Illinois. In the HBO documentary, Becoming Warren Buffett, you had a great analogy comparing investing to hitting a baseball and knowing your sweet spot. Ted Williams knew his sweet spot was a pitch right down the middle. When both of you look at potential investments, what attributes make a company a pitch in your sweet spot that you'll take a swing at and invest in?
Well, I'm not sure I can define it in exactly the terms you would like, but we sort of know it when we see it, and it would tend to be a business that, for one reason or another, we can look out 5 or 10 or 20 years and decide that the competitive advantage that it had at the present would last over that period, and it would have a trusted manager that would not only fit into the Berkshire culture, but that was eager to join the Berkshire culture. And then it would be a matter of price. But the main, when we buy a business, essentially we're laying out a lot of money now based on what we think that business will deliver over time. And the higher the certainty with which we make that prediction, the better we feel about it. You can go back to the first, wasn't the first outstanding business we bought, but it was kind of a watershed event, which was a relatively small company, See's Candy. And the question when we looked at See's Candy in 1972 was, would people still want to be both eating and giving away that candy in preference to other candies? And it wouldn't be a question of people buying candy for the low bid. And we had a manager we liked very much, and we bought a business that was paid $25 million for it net of cash, and it was earning about $4 million pre-tax then, and we must be getting close to $2 billion or something like that pre-tax that we've taken out of it. But it was only because we felt that people would not be buying necessarily a lower price candy. I mean, it does not work very well if you go to your wife or your girlfriend on Valentine's Day. I hope they're the same person, and say, here's a box of candy, honey. I took the low bid. It doesn't. It loses a little as you go through that speech. And we made a judgment about See's Candy that it would be special, and probably not in the year 2017, but we certainly thought it would be special in 1982 and 1992, and fortunately we were right on it. And we're looking for more See's Candies, only a lot bigger. Charlie?
Yeah, but it's also true that we were young and ignorant then. And
now we're old and ignorant. Yeah.
Yes, that's true too. And the truth of the matter is that it would have been very wise to buy See's Candy at a slightly higher price. And if they'd asked it, we wouldn't have done it. So we've gotten a lot of credit for being smarter than we were.
Yeah, and to be more accurate, if it had been $5 million more, I wouldn't have bought it. Charlie would have been willing to buy it. So fortunately, that we didn't get to the point where we had to make that decision that way. But he would have pushed forward when I probably would have faded. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that the guy came around. Actually, the seller was the grandson of Mrs. C, wasn't he, Charlie? He was Larry C's son. Am I correct? Or Larry C's brother. But he was not interested in the business, and he was more interested in girls and grapes, actually. And he almost changed his mind. He did change his mind about selling, and I wasn't there, but Rick Aaron told me that Charlie went in and gave an hour talk on the merits of girls and grapes over having a candy company. This is true, folks. And the fellow sold to us, so that I pulled Charlie out in emergencies like that.
We were very lucky that early the habit of buying horrible businesses because they were really cheap. It gave us a lot of experience trying to fix unfixable businesses as they headed downward toward doom. And that early experience was so horrible, fixing the unfixable, that we were very good at avoiding it thereafter. So I would argue that our early stupidity helped us.
Yeah. We learned we could not make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
No,
so,
we learned.
So we went around looking for silk.
But you have to try it for a long time and fail and have your nose rubbed in it to really understand it.
Okay, Becky, quick.
This question comes from a shareholder named Mark Blackley in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who says, there has been more news than usual in some of Berkshire's core stock holdings, Wells Fargo and the incentive and new account scandal, American Express losing the Costco relationship and playing catch-up in the premium card space, United Airlines and customer service issues, Coca-Cola and slowing soda consumption. How much time is spent reviewing Berkshire stock holdings, and is it safe to assume if Berkshire continues to hold these stocks that the thesis remains intact?
Well, we spend a lot of time thinking. Those are very large holdings. If you add up American Express, Coca-Cola, and Wells Fargo, I mean, you're getting up, well into the high tens of billions of dollars, and those are businesses we like very much. They're different characteristics. In the case of, you mentioned United Airlines, we actually are the largest holder of all four of the large. We're the largest holder of the four largest airlines, and that is much more of an industry thought. But all businesses have problems, and some of them have some very big pluses. I personally, you mentioned American Express. If you read American Express's first quarter report and talk about their Platinum card, the Platinum card is doing very well. The gains around the world, I think there were 17% or something like that in billings in the UK, and 15% is the original currency, or the local currency, Japan, Mexico, and very good in the United States. There's competition in all these businesses. If we thought we did not buy American Express or Wells Fargo or United Airlines, Coca-Cola, with the idea that they would never have problems or never have competition, why we did buy them is we thought they had very, very strong hands, and we liked the financial policies in the case of many of them. We like their position. We bought a lot of businesses, and we do look to see where we think they have durable competitive advantage, and we recognize that if you've got a very good business, you're going to have plenty of competitors who are going to try and take it away from you, and then you make a judgment as to the ability of your particular company and product and management to ward off competitors. They won't go away, but we think, I'm not going to get into the specific names on it, but those companies generally are very well positioned. I've likened essentially, if you've got a wonderful business, even if it's a small one like See's Candy, you basically have an economic castle, and in capitalism, people are going to try and take away that castle from you. So you want a moat around it, protecting it in various ways that can protect it. And then you want a knight in the castle that's pretty darn good at warding off marauders. But they're going to be marauders, and they'll never go away. And if you look at, I think Coca-Cola was 1886, American Express was 51 or 52, starting out with an express business. Wells Fargo with, I don't know what year they were started. Incidentally, American Express was started by Wells and Fargo as well. So these companies had lots of challenges, and they'll have more challenges, and the companies we own have had challenges. Our insurance business has had challenges, but we started with National Indemnity as $8 million purchase in 1968, and fortunately we've had people like Tony Nicely at Geico, and we've had G. Jane, who's added tens of billions of value, and we've got some smaller companies that you probably don't even know about, but really have done a terrific job for us. So there'll always be competition in insurance, but there'll always be things to do that a really intelligent management with a decent distribution system, various things going for them, can do to ward off the marauders. So to the specific question, how much time is spent reviewing the holdings, I would say that I do it every day. I'm sure Charlie does it every day. Charlie?
Well, I don't think I got anything to add to that either.
Well, we'll cut his salary if he doesn't participate here. Okay, Jay Gelb.
This question is on Berkshire's retroactive reinsurance deal with AIG, which was the largest ever of its kind. Based on AIG's track record of reserve deficiencies and the opportunity for Berkshire to invest the float, what is your level of confidence that this contract covering up to $20 billion of AIG's reserves in return for $10 billion of premiums will ultimately be profitable for Berkshire?
Well, at the time we do every deal, I think it's smart. And then sometimes I find out otherwise as we go along. The deal, as Jay knows, but might be unfamiliar to many people, is that AIG transferred to us the liability for 80% of $25 billion, excess of $25 billion. In other words, they had to pay the first $25 billion, and then on the next $25 billion, we had to pay 80% of what they paid, up to a limit of $20 billion, 80% of 25. And we got paid $10.2 billion for that. And this applies to their losses in many classes of business, written or earned before December 31st, 2015. So Ajit Jain, who has made a lot more money for Berkshire for you than I have, but he evaluates that sort of transaction. We talk about it a fair amount ourselves. I just find it interesting. I particularly find the $10.2 billion that they're going to give us interesting. And we come to the conclusion that we think we'll do well by getting $10.2 billion today with a maximum payout of $20 billion over some between now and Judgment Day on this large piece of business. AIG had very good reasons for doing this because their reserves had been under criticism, and this essentially probably it should have, I think, put to bed the question whether they were under-reserved on that business. And we get the $10.2 billion, and the question is how fast we pay out the money and how much money we pay out. And Ajit does 99% of the thinking on that, and I do 1%. And we project out what we think will happen, and we know whatever our projection is that it will be wrong, but we try to be conservative. And we've done a fair amount of these deals. This is the largest. The second largest was a creature that was formed out of Lloyd's of London some years ago. And we've been wrong on one transaction that involved something over $1 billion of premium. I mean, clearly wrong. And there are a couple of others that may or may not work out depending on what you assume we have earned on the funds. But they're okay. But they probably didn't come out as well as we thought they would, though. But overall, we've done okay on this. It's less okay when we're sitting around with $90+ billion of cash. So the incremental $10.2 billion we took in the first quarter is earning us peanuts at the moment. And peanuts is not what fits into the formula for making this an attractive deal. So we do have to assume we'll find uses of the money, but the money will be with us quite a while. And I think our calculations are on the conservative side. They're not the identical calculations that AIG makes. I mean, we come up with our own estimate of payouts and all of that. And I think it was quite a good transaction from AIG's standpoint, because they did take $20 billion of potential losses off for $10.2 billion, and I think they satisfied the investing community that they were quite unlikely to have adverse development in the period prior to 2015 that was not accounted for by this transaction. Charlie?
Well, I think it's intrinsically a dangerous kind of activity, but that's one of its attractions.